Well, the American people have witnessed what is the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country. And here are the facts. 210,000 dead people in our country in just the last several months. Over 7 million people who have contracted this disease. 1 in 5 businesses closed. We're looking at frontline workers who have been treated like sacrificial workers. We are looking at over 30 million people who in the last several months had to file for unemployment.
I mean, quite frankly, when I look at their plan that talks about advancing testing, creating new PPE, developing a vaccine, it looks a little bit like plagiarism, which is something Joe Biden knows a little bit about. And I think the American people know that this is a president who has put the health of America first, and the American people, I believe with my heart, can be proud of the sacrifices they have made. It's saved countless American lives.
So just a few moments from last night's vice presidential debate. Vice President Mike Pence and Senator Kamala Harris trading barbs through plexiglass shields, as you can see. COVID-19, of course, dominated the conversation that was noticeably more civil than what was seen at the presidential debate, certainly. So with more on the highs and lows from last night, we're joined by Jennifer Johnson in Washington. Jennifer, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time. So how would you characterize last night's debate? I don't know, could you say who won and who lost besides the fly, of course?
Well, we'll get to that, Anthony. But I would say the difference between this debate and the presidential debate September 29th was that, as you said, it was a lot more cordial. President Trump did trade a lot of insults in the presidential debate, and it got very unruly. That wasn't the case last night. This was a cordial debate. They talked about the issues. The two candidates were respectful with each other. They, for the most part, stuck to the time limit. Vice President Mike Pence had to be interrupted several times because he did go over the time limit. But for the most part, this was a much more cordial, much more substantive debate where the issues were discussed, particularly coronavirus. You mentioned the fly. There was a fly that landed on Mike Pence's head for about 2 minutes, and it seems to be the one thing that's really trending on Twitter right now. Everyone has a comment about the fly. Anthony?
Yeah, and of course, the issue he was talking about at the time, if I'm not mistaken, was the racial inequality in the United States. So it was just, you know, awkward. It was awkward timing no matter what. But the fact that it just
was awkward. It was awkward
there, and of course, it's getting so much attention, maybe overshadowing the substance of the debate last night. And it was interesting as well because unlike previous vice presidential debates, because these always get less attention, is these two really had to show that they were also presidential, or at least potentially, because of the obvious issues. You know, both presidents, the President Trump and Vice President Joe Biden, at an advanced age, and of course facing a lot of questions about that. How did they come off, I guess, overall?
Well, I think the two vice presidential candidates came off really well. I mean, you know, people will say, well, who won this debate? I think they both did very, very well. Some people thought that Kamala Harris was a little soft on Mike Pence. Other people say that Mike Pence dodged some of the questions he was asked. But I think for the most part, the two of them came across well. To your question, that is true. The next election, the next inauguration, whoever is elected president, either Donald Trump will be 74 or Vice President Joe Biden will be 78 if he takes office. So the question is, you know, Americans do have to pay perhaps more attention to who is running for vice president, who are the vice presidential candidates, how will they potentially run the country, you know, what their beliefs are. You know, obviously they're standing with the presidential candidate, but, you know, I think that Americans need to pay more attention this time around to who these two people are and who potentially could be the president should something happen to the person elected in November and inaugurated in January.
And of course, we can't ignore the fact that President Trump was just diagnosed with COVID-19. So this adds a whole new layer to this. I want to get into sort of where he is right now in terms of the status of his health. But also news just came out this morning of the status of the second presidential debate. What do we know about that?
Right. Like literally a few minutes ago, Anthony, about the next presidential debate, which is supposed to be October 15th. So let me back up. The president is, according to his doctors, and they haven't been terribly transparent in terms of specifics, but according to his doctors, he is doing better. He apparently did go to the Oval Office yesterday. We've seen a lot of pictures of him and videos on Twitter with him not wearing a mask. As the coronavirus, as COVID-19 is continuing to spread through the White House, there have been other people who have been tested, who have tested positive. But the debate commission has decided that the next debate between the two presidential candidates will be virtual. It'll be a town hall setting, and both the candidates will not be together as they were in late September. They will be apart. It will be virtual, and that was a decision, as you mentioned, just came across really about 10-15 minutes ago. And I think part of that is because the CDC guidelines require somebody to isolate for at least 10 to 20 days once they are positive for COVID-19. And that is not something that President Trump has done. And I think for the sake of everyone's protection, they've decided to make this next debate virtual.
It is fascinating, to say the least. Jennifer, we have to leave it there. We really appreciate you joining us this morning with this.
Never dull here.
And never, that is
Thanks,
an
Anthony.
understatement. All right, Jennifer Johnson in Washington.